In the previous video, we had a look at the different ways that we can use to find and review pods. And now that we've selected one, we need to be able to create a pod file to manage our dependencies and integrate it into our project. In this video, we're going to use pod init to create our pod file. And then we're going to edit our pod file to target the correct iOS version, include Swift frameworks, and then we're going to create an inclusion of a pod. And finally, we're going to install our pod and integrate it into our project. In the last video, we selected a pod that we wanted to install, SD Web Image. So let's get started on creating a pod file that will allow us to implement this framework. I'm going to open up Terminal, and I'll open my folder so I can see the magic happen at the same time. In Terminal, I'm going to change directory to my project folder. I can do this by typing cd space and then dragging the folder into Terminal. When I do this, it shows the path in the command line, and when I press enter, I have changed directory. Now, I'm going to type pod space init. As you can see, when I pressed enter, a new file was created in my folder called Podfile. Now I'm going to drag this onto Xcode to open it. As you can see, there's already a lot of boilerplate code already in this file for us to use. And we're going to uncomment two of the lines here to allow our pod file to access the correct target and to allow the inclusion of Swift compiled libraries. Now we're going to add one more line, and we're going to start that with pod and then within quotation marks, SD Web Image. Next, because I like to ensure that I'm not surprised by any new features that could break my code, I'm going to keep my version strict. And I do this by specifying the version within quotation marks. And the version I'm going to use is 3.7.4, which is the latest version outlined in the developer GitHub page. And finally, I'm going to add a comment after it so I can remember what it is that this particular pod does. Let's save this and go back to Terminal. Again, I'm going to keep these two windows running side by side so you can see the process happening at the same time as the folder. I'm already in the project directory, so I'm going to type pod install. And I'm going to add the command --verbose so we can see the full output of what the gem is doing, and then press enter. As you can see when I do this, CocoaPods makes a call up to the main CocoaPods library and updates all the specifications. Once this is completed, it then looks at the pod file and compares the pods within it against the specifications it has in its master. Then it downloads the required pods. The next step is that it creates another project called the Pods project. This contains all the references to the pods you've installed, including any system frameworks that are needed to enable them to run. It then creates a new type of file called an XC workspace, which is an area that includes these two different projects within it. It also creates another file called podfile.log. This file tracks all the versions of the currently installed pods. You can run pod install multiple times, and when you do this, the podlock file will tell CocoaPods which version of the pods they want to install. If you then do pod update, it'll update this pod file lock to the latest version of the pod you're updating. Finally, it creates the build scripts necessary to allow it to link the pod project to your main project. So now we have this, let's go to our folder. But now, instead of opening our project, we're going to exclusively work within this workspace file. And as soon as it opens, we're going to press run, and it should build exactly as it did before. Now that we've learned how to integrate pods into our project, the next thing we're going to use is SD Web Image for lazy image loading.